Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this planning meeting. I'm Janetta Soshan and I chair the meeting. To start with, I need to give you a couple of announcements to listen to. Emergency evacuation procedures. In the case of a fire, a bell will ring continuously. If this occurs, please leave the building immediately, following the green fire exit signs out to the assembly point, which is by the War Memorial on Duke Street. If anyone requires assistance, please let me know. Lifts should not be used. Please remain at the assembly point and do not attempt to return to the building until you've been advised that it's safe to do so. Anyone attending this meeting is entitled to film it, but I should point out that only the councillors, officers, and anyone sitting around these tables may be filmed. Members of the public should not be filmed, so please ensure the cameras are pointed only in this direction. The meeting is being recorded and broadcast live on YouTube. And please will you silence or switch off your mobile phones while the meeting is taking place. Right, moving on. Apologies for absence now.
Thank you, Chair. I've had apologies from Councillors Pooley and Wright.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. All members are reminded they must disclose any interest they know they have in items of business on the meeting's agenda, must do at this point or when they realise that they have an interest. Councillor Dobson.
Yes, I'm the ward councillor that's called in item number 7, so I shall not take part in the debate. Thank you.
No, thank you. Moving on to the minutes, to consider the minutes of the meeting on the 4th of October. Is it your wish I sign these as a true record of the meeting? Thank you. Any member of the public may ask a question or make a statement at this point in the meeting if they cannot stay. Dan, have you had any such requests? Okay, in that case, I'll move straight on. Those who've submitted a valid question or statement that will come up later will be entitled to put it in person. We'll go straight on to item 6, which is Broomfield Mill, Mill Lane, Broomfield, Chelmsford, Essex, CM1 7BQ. And the number is 22/01413/FUL. Can I have the officer's report, please?
Thank you, Chair. The application proposal is for the construction of a residential annex in the rear garden of Broomfield Mill. The committee will be aware that this application follows a similar proposal, which was refused by the committee in April 2022. The application site is Broomfield Mill, which is located within the Green Wedge, outside of any defined settlement. Broomfield Mill House is located on the northern side of Mill Lane, adjacent to the River Chelmer. The grounds are comprised of a collection of outbuildings, a glass house, and prominent boundary walls. The proposal includes the redevelopment of an existing greenhouse and the conversion of a historic pillbox to the northwest of Mill House to facilitate the construction of a residential annex. The plans shown detail that the proposed development would be larger in floor area than the existing built form. The committee should be aware that officers have no issues with the application from a green wedge, heritage, ecological, or neighbour relationship standpoint. So the main issue for consideration is flood risk. In this case, the application site, as shown in the strategic flood mapping on the slide, lies within flood zone 3B, being located directly adjacent to the River Chelmer. Flood Zone 3B is classified as functional floodplain and is deemed to be the most at-risk land of flooding from rivers or the sea. The Council, in their strategic flood risk assessment, have classified areas at significant risk of flooding to be within Flood Zone 3B. The committee will recall that the proposal for the same development was refused in April. This previous application was deemed unacceptable because the site is located in Flood Zone 3B and therefore unacceptable in principle. No mitigation to compensate for the loss of floodplain was provided, and the proposal would have increased the risk of flooding on the site and elsewhere. The current application proposes the same building in the same position as the previous refusal. The main difference between the applications, however, is that the current scheme proposes to mitigate against and compensate for the loss of floodplain storage. Included within the proposal is the enlargement of an existing pond within the floodplain located in the water meadow roughly 400 metres to the south of Broomfield Mill. The plans detail that 20 cubic metres of floodplain will be lost due to the proposed development, but this will be compensated by the enlargement of the pond, which will create an additional 63.7 cubic metres of floodplain storage. Sorry, that's 28.7 lost, 63.7 gained. The Environment Agency have provided further comment on the proposed mitigation and have stated that whilst compensatory storage has been proposed, this is in the functional floodplain and therefore does not address the loss of capacity caused by the development. Officers deem the compensatory pond to adequately mitigate against the loss of floodplain storage, as it will work as follows. The proposed enlarged pond would connect to the river through an existing ditch to the southeast. As the river fills with floodwater, it reaches the level of the connecting ditch. The compensation pond fills from the river via the ditch. Eventually, the river overtops the bank and the floodplain floods. The stored water remains in the pond until the river level falls. And once the flood abates and the flow is contained in the channel, the level in the pond drops as the river level falls. So officers accept the enlargement of the pond as acceptable mitigation which compensates for the loss of floodplain volume. Based on these compensatory measures, the proposal would result in the net gain of floodplain storage, which weighs in favour of the development. The NPPF requires that local authorities take into account local circumstances when assessing flood risk. Broomfield Mill is well protected by historic boundary walls and earth bunds, minimising the impact and protecting against flooding. The flood risk assessment submitted with the application shows that flood resilient and resistance measures have been incorporated into the scheme, which ensures that the development will be safe in terms of flood risk. So, to conclude, the application overcomes the previous refusal as it includes compensatory measures which mitigate against the loss of floodplain volume. As such, the proposal is acceptable and meets the requirements of policies S2 and DM18 of the Chelmsford Local Plan. Officers recommend approval of the plan application.
Thank you. Now, I think the only person wishing to speak tonight is Councillor Daden. So if you go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to be back again, to publicly thank officers, especially Josh, because I know he spent considerable time re-evaluating this proposal that he is recommending to be approved tonight, as it meets all the planning considerations with a good use of a brownfield site to support our self-build initiatives. Policy DM18 of the local plan requires a flood risk assessment of sites in flood zone 3. And the policy also allows planning permission to be granted when we can demonstrate that the site is safe for all types of flooding and it doesn't worsen the flood risk elsewhere. The officer's report in 1.6 and 6.14 agrees that this application fulfills those requirements and it is safe to approve. And perhaps it's been because of our officers' thoroughness in visiting the site that has led the City Council to a deeper understanding of this situation, which has aided a solution and has aligned the Council's view with the professional opinion of the leading authority in flood assessing, namely JBA, who provided the flood risk assessment. Perhaps visiting more sites is something this committee could consider going forward, so we may have fairer decisions sooner in the future. It can be problematic to evidence a garden doesn't flood when its likelihood is placed 1 in 30 years. So please know that the family are consistent that Broomfield Mill curtilage did not meet the definition of a functional flood zone 3B, and the natural path of the river runs wide to the east of Broomfield Mill. Our ancestors have deliberately built the mill on high ground that was available, and they redirected the river to the mill, allowing occupants to control the water flow and ensuring that the house and the garden is always protected. So whilst the north garden wall does protect the site further from flooding, the riverbank to the garden has little defence. It's not significantly high and it doesn't even offer a man-made wall. It's just fragmented hedge, which seems more for decoration purpose, and perhaps the greatest testimony that the marriage family, who have resided in the mill for over 200 years, that they've never felt the need in all that time to amend that riverbank to protect their home from flooding, because in their opinion, flooding is just not an issue to them. So please have confidence tonight in voting for this application. With the addition of the newly sized pond, this offers greater protection for our city centre and the neighbours around it. So I hope tonight that this committee will support the officer's recommendation to approve the annex at Broomfield Mill. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Before do the officers want to come on anything? Right. In that case, I'll take it straight over to the committee. Who would like to start? Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Two quick things. Can you confirm that the pond is in the same flood zone classification? I thought it was the case. Okay, great. Second thing, what is it that the Environment Agency have got the issue with? Because to me, looking at the plans, this does seem okay. Is it just that they carte blanche refuse anything in 3B? Is it as simple as that?
Please answer.
So the Environment Agency have, it is quite a blanket assessment, to be honest. Because it's in flood zone 3B, in their view, its development is unacceptable in principle. So we've gone through the correct procedure. Because we were going to recommend approval, we went back to the Environment Agency for further comment, and we asked them specifically about the mitigation proposed. And their comment was that because the pond is located in the flood zone, it doesn't add to the flood zone, the additional flood zone storage. As officers, we're taking a pragmatic view that it's a very small development and the mitigation proposed, in our view, is sufficient to compensate for the loss of floodplain.
Thank you. Who else would like to comment? Councillor Poulter.
Thank you, Chairman. I think we are very right to be cautious about going against the advice of the Environment Agency. But I note that their objection is an objection in principle. I interpret that to mean that they don't object to this on its particular merits, but rather that they object to it because of where it is rather than what it is. So taking that into account, and I also compare it to what I will call an attenuation pond, or the potential attenuation pond outside John Lewis, which is to deal with potential flooding problems. That is very close to the river, and I assume it's probably in the same or very similar flood zone. it would be inconsistent to take a different view on this application to one that we have in the town centre. What the frequency of that is, I don't know. But this is a 30-year one, and it is comparatively minor. The damage that could be done is comparatively minor. It's not affecting buildings other than one particular building. So on that basis, I'm inclined to approve the recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on this? Councillor Dobson?
As the mic's still on. Thank you, Chair. Yes, like Councillor Porter, I mean, when I read this application, I did have my concerns about the EA advice, as I think we probably all did. But when you read further into it and you consider the actual size of the developments and its potential impact on the floodplain, like everything in planning, I think you've got to look at these things in balance. And from my point of view, if the mitigation measures have been drawn up by experts and, you know, everything else slots into place, again, I don't have a problem with the application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Ashley?
I was just going to ask the officer, maybe I missed it, but was there any mention of trees, ecology, hedging, native hedging? I know it's only a small development, but I might have missed that.
So can I just ask in what context? I mean, it's a domestic extension within a domestic garden. I'm not quite sure what you're coming from. Sorry.
Because we've been talking about flooding. I've seen from the map there is shrubs and planting there, but is there scope for any more trees or?
One of the conditions that we're recommending on the decision is details of hard and soft landscaping to be submitted. So we would be looking for, as we would do with most, you know, household applications in the countryside, some kind of, you know, greening up or extra greening if we can achieve it. So we have a planning condition that might, you know, satisfy you.
Right.
I have one question. The pillbox. I must say I found it difficult to see it in the actual photos. Is there any way of showing that? I know it was meant to be hidden. Where? It may be my eyesight tonight. Which one?
The left-hand side image.
The left-hand side.
You can see it in the right-hand side one as well.
Oh, yeah. No, sorry. I thought you meant the left-hand side of the other one. I couldn't. It's in both. It's, I gather, an unusual design as well, isn't it? Slightly different from normal. Okay, thank you. That's all I wanted. Thank you. Quite fond of pillboxes, that's why. Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else who wants to speak? No? In that case, Councillor Poulter, would you?
Thank you, Chairman. I move the recommendation that the application be approved subject to the conditions set out in the report to members and for the reasons stated.
Okay. All those in favour? All those in favour, yes? Looks like everyone. Thank you very much. That is approved. Thank you. We'll then move on. You're welcome to stay if you've been involved in the first application. This goes on to Tinsley Farm, Blind Lane, West Hanningfield, Chelmsford, CM28UF. And then it's 22201747 stroke FUL. Can I have the officer's report, please?
Thank you. So the application seeks retrospective permission for the change of use of 2 agricultural buildings to commercial storage. Tinsley Farm is located to the northeast of West Hanningfield and is accessed from Blind Lane. The site is an established farmyard within a rural location and is surrounded by arable fields and woodland. There are residential properties located along Blind Lane, but these are located some distance from the farmyard itself. The application site is located in the Greenbelt and is surrounded by open and undeveloped farmland. The 2 buildings which have been converted to commercial use are outlined in red. Officers are content that the proposal is an appropriate form of development in the Greenbelt. Therefore, the main issue for deliberation is the impact of the change of use to highway safety. The objections received from local residents raise concern that the conversion of the former agricultural buildings to commercial has led to an increase in large vehicles accessing the site. The objections cite that this increase in large vehicle movements is causing highway safety issues on Blind Lane, as it is a narrow, single-track rural lane which is unsuitable for large commercial vehicles. To assess the impact of the proposal to highway safety, it is important to establish the use of each building on the site and the vehicle movements associated with that use. So building 1, outlined in blue, is occupied by a toy company to store toys for distribution and or sale. Our understanding is that the building has been occupied by this business since 2019. The movements generated from the use of this building include a small van twice a week. Building 2, as outlined in red, is occupied by, a furniture company to store, just copied that twice. So a furniture storage business. The vehicle movements associated with that building are a 7.5 tonne lorry once or twice a month. There are no large HGV movements associated with the use of this building. The MPPF requires us to assess highway impacts cumulatively. It is therefore also important to assess the vehicle movements in association with other uses at Tinsley Farm. The commercial storage building outlined in green, already granted consent, generates 1 car movement per week and 1 7.5 tonne small lorry movement every 3 months. The building outlined in orange is the recently constructed modern grain store. Tinsley Farm operates a modern agricultural enterprise and requires many tractors and heavy goods vehicle movements with its associated activities, both to access land surrounding the farm and to move grain and straw away. The farm produces over 4,000 tonnes of grain, which is sent to mills and grain merchants using 29-tonne lorries. This equates to 180 heavy goods vehicle movements per year. The farm also receives manure deliveries and sells straw, which equates to an additional 30 HGV movements per year. With reference to the concerns from local residents, officers do not dispute that there are heavy goods vehicles using Blind Lane, as these are in association with the lawful agricultural use of Tinsley Farm. The storage uses subject to this application, due to their size and use, generate minimal vehicle movements to and from Tinsley Farm. These are typically vans and 7.5 tonne lorries. The conversion to commercial storage has not harmfully increased the level of traffic movements along Blind Lane. Overall, Blind Lane is considered capable of carrying any vehicles associated with the storage uses. The concerns of local residents about the traffic use of Blind Lane are noted, as are the low levels of traffic generated by the existing occupiers of the barns. It is not unreasonable in this case to restrict the occupation of the 2 barns to the current storage uses, as different uses could result in different levels and types of traffic generation, which could be detrimental to highway safety. To conclude, the large vehicle movements are in association with the lawful agricultural use of the site. The proposed storage uses generate low levels of traffic. The proposal has had no adverse impact on highway safety, subject to conditions restricting the use to existing occupants. Officer's recommendation is for approval.
Thank you. Now we have several people who wish to speak. Mrs. Jeffries, do you wish to speak now?
Hello. Am I on? Yeah?
Yes.
You can hear me anyway. Hello, my name is Linda Jeffries. I've lived in Blind Lane for 34 years. So I know everything that goes up and down the lane every day of my life. So this is what I want to bring to your attention. I wish to bring to the attention of this planning committee this day, the 10th of January 2023, a false statement made in the planning application number 22/01747/4 regarding Tinsley Farm, Blind Lane. This false statement is contained in Essex County Council Highways comment, and it's a detailed statement. The reference of that comment is CO/EGD/SD/RM/CHL/22/174730/189. This comment is dated the 16th of November 2022. The false statement is that this planning application would remove a number of 8 29-tonne grain lorry movements from Blind Lane per week. But as it's just been pointed out, the grain at Tinsley Farm is now stored at Tinsley Farm in the new purpose-built barn with a capacity to hold 4,000 tonnes of grain. So there's no reduction whatsoever in the number of grain lorry movements in Blind Lane, as all the grain is now stored in the newly built grain barn. Coach House Juggernauts deliver furniture for the operating interior design business at Tinsley Farm. Pilgrim Foods use HGV vehicles to deliver food for the 4 catering business that operate at Tinsley Farm. A live event transporter Juggernaut vehicle has been seen in Blind Lane to access Tinsley Farm. The proposed change of use of the 2 barns, which were each built to store 1,000 tonnes of grain, have purpose-built height and width access for 29-tonne lorries. This false statement of reduction in the number of vehicle movements in Blind Lane is contained in the planning statement submitted by Rural Foxes. The size of the newly built barn grain is clearly quite evident as what we've just seen. But as I say, living in Blind Lane, I know the juggernauts that go to the other businesses, the existing businesses that all operate without planning permission at Tinsley Farm. Juggernaut vehicles, coach house vehicles, delivering furniture to Marie Stacey's Interiors Design Limited company.
Please bring your comments to a close, please. You've gone over your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think you've covered everything. Thank you. Moving on to Mrs. Bingham-Wallace. Again, the same thing. It's 2 minutes.
Thank you and good evening. This application is for a retrospective permission to use 2 farm buildings at Tinsley Farm for long-term storage use, toys and furniture. The applicant operates a large-scale modern agricultural business and can produce over 4,000 tonnes of grain. The applicant also farms an additional 600 acres in South Hanningfield, where grain and inputs are stored at a separate location. The farmyard, including the proposal site, has mixed-stage buildings, from modern steel portal frame buildings to smaller, older steel former agricultural sheds. It is within these types of buildings that the proposal relates. It is acknowledged that there have been several public objections to the scheme based upon concerns over traffic movements rather than the proposed use itself. To summarise, the objections are based on the fear that the proposed use will significantly increase the number of HGV movements to and from the site. It is essential to differentiate between the movements that the storage use and the agricultural use generate. As mentioned, the farm produces in excess of 4,000 tonnes, which needs transporting off the holding. This requires 29-tonne HGVs to move grain to merchants and flour mills. To be clear, the storage use would not use nor increase this type of traffic or frequency, and nor would it reduce it. We have never claimed as such. The storage use uses small post office vans 2 or 3 times a week and a small 7.5-tonne lorry 2 to 3 times a week, per month. These are not HGV movements, nor is the Luton lorry as frequent as the HGVs for grain transport. At this frequency, it is considered that there is minimal impact by the lorry movements and that the toy storage do not significantly intensify the road use. It also needs to be considered that should the storage use not be supported, the former agricultural sheds would have to be returned to agricultural use, grain storage or crop inputs such as seeds and fertilisers. These would result from the necessity to store grain and inputs from the farm in South Hanningfield, which we transported to the main farm by large tractor and transported by HGV. The applicant welcomes the conditions.
Thank you very much. Moving on to Parish Councillor Tatum.
Good evening, thank you. So I'm going to read a statement that's been prepared by the Parish Council, as you can imagine. So thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name's Steve Tatum, as you just heard, and I'm one of the planning representatives and Vice Chairman of West Hanningfield Parish Council. Prior to this meeting, West Hanningfield Parish Council submitted a document detailing our comments, which you should have seen before you tonight. Yeah. Within this document, under section 3, neighbour and residents' comments, it stated that clarification had been requested from Essex Highways but had not been received. However, Essex Highways have now provided a response. The one key point of clarification requested was regarding the cumulative effect of traffic in the area. It appears to us that Essex Highways are under the impression that the change of use will reduce the amount of traffic. This is factually incorrect. The potential 2,000 tonnes of grain storage across the 2 units has in fact been moved to the new storage units, which have been built within the last 10 years and are on the same site. As a result, the change of use will actually increase traffic, as this grain storage has not been replaced but increased. This will result in a much larger volume of traffic, which will have a negative impact on the area. If anything, we believe that a size and weight restriction should be applied to Blind Lane and its feeder road, Ship Road, with the exception of farm vehicles. The notion that Blind Lane is already used by traffic vehicles is not a valid reason that we'll be able to accept and tolerate further traffic increases. The submitted traffic plan takes no account of existing commercial traffic levels. To date, no traffic or environmental surveys have taken place or carried out to our knowledge. Blind Lane is not suitable for any further increases in traffic. It is physically restrictive. There are no passing places, no footways, and there are blind turns and hill crests. There is poor access from Ship Road, and the road surface and margins are in very poor condition. Blind Lane also has numerous deep potholes, which we can all sympathise with, I think, and subsidence and poor drainage. It is also prone to flooding, and because this is a single track, it is virtually impossible to maintain. It is a road well used by horse riders, dog walkers, ramblers, and these groups would face a further impact on their safety. We note that the recent addition of plan application with proposed planning conditions to be applied. However, these are impossible to police and would give rise to misuse by the existing and future tenants of the buildings concerned, which could result in further increases in traffic. A previous application for New Barn Farm on Blind Lane requested the same change of use, which was declined. Tinsley Farm should be declined for the same reasons. We appreciate that plan applications are considered against the information given. However, there's also the assumption that this information is correct and therefore be dealt with on its merits. However, the bigger picture here must be considered over and above the application itself. The Parish Council has an overall responsibility for the well-being of its residents, and we are passionate about our lovely village and the surrounding areas, and we are keen to avoid industrialisation on a large scale. Our residents are very much against the increase in traffic, both on Blind Lane and the surrounding feeder roads, that will result in the application if it's approved. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Finally, Councillor Dobson.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, and thank you for this opportunity to speak against this item. I have been asked to call in this application as ward member by both the parish council and local residents who are very concerned with the potential impact on highway safety if this application is approved. The application, as you have heard, is for retrospective permission for the change of use of 2 barns from agricultural to B8 storage and is recommended for approval by planning officers. First of all, I would like to thank the farm owners for meeting me and showing me around the premises, including the 2 barns in question. The updated advice from Highways does take into account the existing use of the new grain storage barns and confirm that grain is moved by 29-tonne HGVs at certain times of the year. This is expected and is not under question. What the Highways advice does not take into account, however, is the cumulative effect of the application, if approved, along with the traffic movements associated with the other businesses operating from the site, some of which are still to have planning regularised. No traffic survey has been done to demonstrate the level of vehicle movements generated by all the existing businesses alongside those being considered here tonight. The advice from Highways also does not take into account the potential to increase the level of usage of the barns under question. When I visited the site, it was very obvious that neither barn is being used to capacity, and in fact, both, in my opinion, were hugely underutilised. Whilst the current tenants' use of these barns generate little vehicular traffic, there is a potential that a tenant, either the current or another in future, could operate on a far greater scale despite the proposed conditions, and traffic could significantly increase in future on this basis. Members should remember that they are considering the change of use of these buildings to B8 storage in perpetuity, regardless of the tenants occupying them, and not approving them on the basis of the current tenants. Whilst the Highways advice gives an indication of the current position, I feel it's lacking in consideration for the true picture if the buildings were utilised for their true potential. It is interesting to note that a similar application for the use of an agricultural building to B8 was refused by this council in 2001, as it did, and I quote, did not have satisfactory links with the road hierarchy and, again a quote, detrimental effects on local amenities. The application went to appeal, which was dismissed by the inspector for, I quote, material harm to highway safety and to living conditions of occupiers of properties in the vicinity of the site. This was for another farm in Blind Lane nearby. Whilst it is dated 2001, it is still very relevant today, perhaps now even more so with the increase of traffic everywhere. I note that the 2 conditions limiting the use of the buildings without further application have been proposed. Whilst this is an improvement, it is likely they will be unenforceable and do not address the potential increase in traffic if the businesses expand and the type of vehicle that is able to access the site. And I understand that it would not be practical to apply a condition limiting the intensity of use. The farm is a working farm and vehicle movements are expected. However, the size and number of buildings within the farm now being changed from agricultural to B8 is concerning from a highways perspective. In summary, I urge members to refuse this application on the grounds that it contravenes policy DM29, which states that, and I quote, development should not result in excessive noise, activity or vehicle movements, and approval, I believe, is likely to adversely impact on the highway safety of all users. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Now we have our Highways officer here, Mr. Muckroft, so I'm happy to ask him to clarify anything covered by the objectors and the ones in favour. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate this is contentious. However, one of the things I'll point out is the Highway Authority recommendation. I've reissued a new recommendation which actually doesn't include the statement that it removes, that this proposal would remove the movements for the 29-tonne lorries. That has been withdrawn. However, when we do consider planning applications, the existing permitted use and the trip generation the vehicle movements are material. The two barns currently have a permitted use for storing 1,000 tonnes of grain between them, and these to service this particular use, the buildings would generate up to 4 two-way movements a week of 29-tonne lorries. The retrospective use, storage use that's been proposed, would actually generate, and I did state this in the preamble on the recommendation, is actually the toy storage in Building 1 would actually generate two postal lorries, small light goods vehicles, 7.5 tonnes. It's 2 per month, not 2 per week in the statement. And Building 2, again, 2 per month. So what you're looking at is 1 7.5 tonne vehicle per week. In terms of the Highway Authority recommending refusal for this, we'd have to what we have to do is we have to take into account the existing permitted use and trip generation. And the proposed use falls well below that in terms of its trip generation and the type of vehicle that would service these two buildings. In terms of the other uses on the site that are perhaps not permitted, that is a matter for planning enforcement and not to be considered as part of this application. It's not something I can consider. I have to look at what is before me, and I've made the comments from that highway point of view. So in terms of the recommendation, we can't recommend refusal. And from what we've seen, the recommended conditions would hold down the use as it is currently. So we've got nowhere to go in terms of recommending refusal. If we go to, what we have to bear in mind when we make a recommendation for refusal is, can it be defended at appeal? Since 2001, the planning, the NPPF has come in, the National Planning Policy Framework, and in the National Planning Policy Framework, it does state a planning application should only be refused where the impact is deemed to be severe. This use has been actually, this is a retrospective application, and Building 1 has been occupied by the toy storage company since May 2019, and Building 2 for the storage of furniture, that is March 2021. The accident record has been consulted, and there have been no recorded injury collisions associated with these uses and movements on Blind Lane over the last 3 years. On that basis, I appreciate it's not palatable. The Highway Authority cannot recommend refusal.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. I shall, unless the officers want to come in.
If I'll just follow up on a point
Yes.
made by Richard and by a couple of the objectors. Let me get there first. This one. So there is a open enforcement investigation on the site for other changes of use, which we are aware of, and the applicant is working closely with us to regularise those other uses. And when those applications come in, we will assess the further cumulative highway impacts. That's
Okay.
just the point.
Thank you. Right, I'll throw it open to the committee. Who would like to start? Councillor Poulter.
I don't want to stop anybody else going first, Chairman, but I didn't see any other hands go up, so here we go. I I find the comments from the Parish Council, from Steve Tatum and from Councillor Dobson very persuasive. And I've also listened carefully to what Mr McCod has had to say. The conditions restricting the use to toy and furniture storage are very helpful. It's a very positive step, so thank you for that. This application only concerns the use from the two buildings and not the traffic generated from the other buildings or the existing usage. We're only concerned with the increase. And we as a committee cannot restrict any HGV usage or weight restrictions. That is a matter entirely within the control of highways, who no doubt can make an objective decision on that matter. But the residents' concerns for the traffic from these two barns is real and it's well founded, and residents will be affected. The use is restricted to toy and furniture usage, but it's not restricted to the frequency of the usage, the frequency of traffic, or the intensity of the use, nor can we do that. We know from what we've been told what the current usage is and the current traffic levels that it generates. But that can increase, and probably will increase, as the years go by and the buildings become more used. And that will have an impact on the neighbours. It will have a condition on the road itself. It will affect other road users because the road is single track and it's nearly a mile long. So if there are two vehicles going in opposite directions, particularly if one of them is an HGV or a farm vehicle, there are very real problems. Those problems exist. They will be exacerbated if this application is approved. There are only two light vehicle passing places. That would be perhaps for a car and a van. There are no lay-bys. The conflict between motor vehicles and horse riders and dog walkers is unresolved. The risk is that the usage here will be drip, drip, drip. It will be a gradual increase rather than a one-off increase. This is our chance as a committee, perhaps our only chance, to restrict the future use, which is why I believe this application should be refused for the reasons so eloquently put forward by Councillor Dobson as being contrary to DM29 because of the increase of traffic on the amenities of neighbours and on the road itself, because the road is manifestly unsuitable for any increase in traffic. So, Chairman, I cannot support the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Who else would like to speak? Yes, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I understand the concerns about the road traffic, but I don't agree that we don't consider its current use and compare it to that against what it's going to become. So if it's currently an agricultural use, then it's entirely possible if this application doesn't go through now, if it's refused, then that will be used again for agricultural use, and there will be vehicle movements involved with that. And considering the vehicle movements that are on that site at the moment because of the agricultural use, it would imply that probably they're going to be significantly bigger vehicles than are associated with the furniture shop or the furniture storage and the toy storage. So I'm inclined to vote in favour of the proposal because when you compare and take that cumulative effect, then there are already a lot of movements, vehicle movements, heavy goods vehicle movements associated with the agricultural use, and actually compared to that, the use of these as commercial storage is, yes, there is some movement, but it's not as much. It's not a great road for it, but this is where the buildings are. And they do have permission to be used for agricultural use. There will be very good, large goods vehicles involved with that use. So if you're making that comparison from one to the other, the commercial use, I don't think is detrimental to the highways. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes. Councillor Shaw.
Yep, I just wanted to say, I mean, I'm inclined to agree with the arguments that Councillor Large has put forward. The only thing that raised any doubt in my mind, listening to the statements, was Councillor Dobson's statement that the full capacity of these barns for storage isn't yet being utilised. How much that would add, I don't know, because there's no sort of ratios given of what's used and what could still be added. But I think that is rather sort of nebulous speculation compared to the figures we've got for the planned use, and I don't think that would outweigh the other arguments about the different kind of movements and the small number at the moment of additional traffic and different type. Thank you.
Thank you. Huh? Sorry. I'm having a job reading the...
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Highland, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. In principle, I'm not a fan of retrospective planning applications, but I think on this occasion, when we look at the planning objections, they're very weak, if they're at all there. The minor movement of vehicles that we see from these new developments, and we have to look at the planning application before us, not what's there in the future or what's there in the past, what's there before us today. So I do not see any planning objection to this change of use. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Roper. Yeah.
Chairman, we already have the existing position. We know what the traffic is like already. One of these buildings has been occupied for 3.5 years, the other one for nearly 2 years. So we know what the position is and what is likely to be in the immediate future. The officers have done a thorough job here and have come up with a recommendation for approval. The county highways accepted. And I would just point out that we're talking about 2 buildings that formerly held 2,000 tonnes of grain. We already know the number of heavy lorries that are likely to or are in operation throughout the year on a 4,000 tonne grain storage. We're going to add those heavy lorries by 50% if it were to revert to agriculture. So I'm quite happy with the situation as it is, and I shall certainly support the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? Councillor Lilly.
Thank you, Chair. Question with regards to a previous application on this site that was approved July last year. Could you give a rough explanation as to what that retrospective application was about and if any conditions were imposed and what traffic flows were possibly like? I appreciate the officer responsible may not be yourself. Thank you. Right.
Anyone have that? We don't seem to have that information.
We're getting up.
You're getting it? Good, thank you. Didn't hear that.
Thank you. So the previous application, which was approved earlier this year, was for change of use from agricultural to storage unit B8. There were no neighbour objections, no objections from the Highway Authority. I'm not sure we even sought traffic information because it was a fairly uneventful application. So that's what I've got.
Right, thanks. Anything else, folks? No? In that case, I'll move to the recommendation. The recommendation that Tinsley Farm Blind Lane proposal is approved. Do I have a second? Councillor Roper. It's for the recommendations on page 6 and 7 of the application, the conditions. So thank you. Can I have all those in favour, please? Thank you. And all those against? Thank you. I'm afraid the application is carried. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. And we still have item 8, which is planning appeals, but I'm happy for you to look at those yourselves. So thank you very much, and that's the end of the meeting. Thanks, everybody.